last thing I want to talk about here. Man, this one, I've been talking about it for 2 days. I'm kind of tired of talking about it, but it needs to be talked about. TJ Watt has lost at least one Defensive Player of the Year vote. This one coming from NBC Sports' Peter King, who voted for Myles Garrett. And look, I got nothing against Myles Garrett. I think if you vote for Myles Garrett for the right reasons, totally fine, totally valid. Peter King's is not totally valid, not all right in my book, just is what it is. So he decided to vote for Myles Garrett, and this was his explanation. Quote, I picked Garrett in order. My top 5 were Garrett, Micah Parsons, TJ Watt, Max Crosby, and Khalil Mack. Garrett was high in both PFF grade and next-gen pass rush metrics, and his team was the number 1 defense in football. He continued to say Watt has 4.5 more sacks than Crosby and 5 more than Garrett and Parsons. That matters, getting home more than anything else. It matters a lot. Per next-gen stats, though, Watt had a pressure rate of 13.7% per rush. Good, but down the list from the best edge rushers. Watt would have won it in bygone years because of his sack numbers, and his terrific overall play could win it this year when the awards are announced in Las Vegas. Okay, so you're judging off of PFF grades. You're judging off of next-gen stats. Everybody has their own opinion on both. I think PFF is nonsense and remains nonsense, and I think it could be used in a lot of good ways. I think their grades are absolute BS, and I think a lot of players are coming into the notion, and a lot of coaches are starting to realize that their grades are a bunch of BS. They're just random people who are coming up with random grades at random times. I mean, they put out halftime grades. How do you put out halftime grades on players? You didn't sit there and watch the tape again. You just put them out. Like, you just watched the first half of the game and went, yeah, I think Myles Garrett got a 98 on that one. Pretty positive Myles Garrett got a 98 on that one. So let's just read some numbers here. Let's just go through it. TJ Watt's stats this season. 19 sacks, 19 tackles for loss, 36 quarterback hits, 3 fumble recoveries, 4 forced fumbles, 8 pass deflections, 1 interception, and 1 game-winning touchdown over the Cleveland Browns. Now, Cleveland Browns defensive end, Myles Garrett, 14 sacks, down 2 sacks from a year ago, 17 tackles for loss, down 1 tackle for loss a year ago, 30 quarterback hits, 1 fumble recovery, 4 forced fumbles, 3 pass deflections. Let's dive into the PFF grades, just to lay everything out here. Myles Garrett, top-ranked edge rusher in the NFL per PFF. A 93.6 grade on the season. TJ Watt, 91.9. Rush defense, Myles Garrett, graded a 78.4. TJ Watt, an 80.7. Pass rush grade. Myles Garrett, 94.7. TJ Watt, 91.7. Coverage grade. Myles Garrett, 59.5. TJ Watt, 70.6. You add those up and you divide them by 3 or however you go about it. I don't know how PFF does it. Does not equal 93.7 and a 91.7 or whatever it is. Either way, TJ Watt does not get a vote from Peter King. Shout out PFF. You hear all that nonsense. What are your thoughts?
Well, here are my thoughts. I don't hate PFF, I think, as much as you do. But I think I look at their use of kind of predictive stats, their use of like these kind of, well, this guy did everything he was supposed to do on this rep and he won, like he won his individual, his one-on-one, whatever, however you want to put it. I mean, I think predictive stats really only go so far, especially in a sport like football, when you're not actually finishing off the play, you know?
Yep.
Because like, this isn't baseball where you're gonna get your turns to hit every time, like you're gonna get your turn to field every time, you're gonna get your pitch, whatever. So like, as long as you're doing the right process, you're gonna get a hit, you're gonna get a strikeout, whatever you want, you're gonna get good results. This is football, man. Like, teams can isolate you, teams can run away from you, teams can take you out of games. No one was able to take TJ Watt out of a game this year.
Nope.
And that's what led to him getting 19 sacks and 19 tackles for loss. Like, that there's a reason why he's leading the league in these categories, and it's because he is impossible to take out of a game. You know, he wrecks games no matter what opposing defenses or opposing offenses try to do to contain him. And so I think predictive stats only go so far when they're not aligning with the actual counting stats that we've used for the better part of the last century.
Yes.
And I get it. Like, football's evolving. You got to be able to look at the game from different ways. I feel like I'm a stats guy. I'm an analytics guy, but like at some point the actual results have to matter. We can, we can go crazy over these predictive stats as much as we want, but I mean, just like look at what's actually happening on the field. Look at what's actually being produced, and I feel like that should tell the story more than, I don't know, these stats that are, like you said, arbitrary. Like, we're not comparing the same things.
No.
Like I'm sure you saw the JJ Watt thing about PFF grades. Like, they just don't line up with NFL coaching grades, and I think that's another big point, is that we're just not talking about the same things. Like there's a million people out there making their own grades and making up stats like win rate and EPA and everything like that. Like, we got to be able to talk about the same thing if we're going to compare guys. And the only thing we have right now to do that is, the counting stats, sacks, tackles for loss, actual tackles, things like that.
Yep. I agree. Look at, and I'm not a grades guy at all. I'm not an analytics guy. I think analytics do play a place in football. I really, really, truly do. I don't think they should go into things like, I don't think predictive stats should go into something like an award or an honor or anything like that. I think what you do on the field is what you do on the field, and there are reasons for this. And I think that's the most difficult part about it, is if you didn't look at PFF, if Peter King watched every game, which he should as a voter, go and pick his guys and then sit down and watch the games. If you watch the games, you realize TJ Watt is double teamed all the time. He doesn't switch sides nearly as much as Myles Garrett does. I mean, we watched the playoff game, and Myles Garrett's getting completely taken out of the game by Laramie Tunsil. So the Cleveland Browns switch sides, and they put Myles Garrett on the other side of the game for the entire game. The Steelers would never do that. They'd put him over there for a snap or two, and then they'd put him right back to the right side where he plays all the time. That's where the difference comes in. Is it's all defensive dependent, it's all scheme dependent, it's all whatever. Like, and in this case, it just doesn't add up. TJ sat there and got double teamed and got all the pressure on him all season long, and all offenses were focused on taking TJ Watt out of games, and he couldn't do it. And he gave the Steelers opportunities in times. I mean, he literally won them a game this season. He won them a game. They don't win that game, they don't make the playoffs. Like, I'm sorry. That's the most valuable defensive player on the field. And I think that is, I think there's a billion arguments to make that TJ Watt is the defensive player of the year. But just to stick to the PFF thing, I think it goes so much deeper than that. And it removes things like TJ Watt won a game for the Pittsburgh Steelers this season, or had 2 sacks against the Ravens in week 17 or week 18 when they desperately needed to win that game to make the playoffs. It removes that stuff, and you don't get that unless you watch the game, and you don't get that if you look at PFF grades. And that's where my issue is.
Yeah, and it feels like we're trying to shoehorn Myles Garrett into this conversation with, stats that, like I said, there's no consistency to this.
No,
they're not. I don't want to say they're made up, but they're there's just no. It's different formulas for different people, and you can't compare 2 players, or you can't compare a group of players if we're not all talking about the same things. So I mean, we got to have. And also,
where does this come in? Where does this come in? Because TJ Watt played nearly 100 more snaps than Myles Garrett. Does that count for anything? Do you take that into consideration when you're thinking about these things? I don't know. I don't know where. I don't know what the line is and where it's drawn and what makes different. I mean, because you could even look at Max Crosby played 100 more snaps than TJ Watt did. Myles Garrett played the least amount of anybody in the top 7. I just don't know. I think there's too much that goes into it if you just lay it out there and say, hey, look, these are the stats, and just watch the game. I think that's what you do, is you watch the games and then you decide, because there are weeks this season where Myles Garrett blocks a kick and scores a touchdown and wins a game for the Browns and looks unbelievable. And then there's games where TJ Watt wins a game for the Steelers and he looks unbelievable. And I think you have to determine it there. I don't think you should be looking at analytics and saying, oh, well, his pass rush rate was higher. So we're going to give it to him. No, I think you got to do more digging than that. That's where my issue comes in. Hopefully this is the only lost one to PFF grades, but I doubt it. And the more we move forward, the more it kind of feels like TJ Watt's not going to win Defensive Player of the Year, which in my opinion is nonsense. But I have not gone and watched every snap from Max Crosby and Micah Parsons and Myles Garrett. So maybe I should stop talking and go watch the film like everybody else.